All right, welcome to the Sunday chat. Welcome to our Sunday chats. So we try to do these chats every Sunday that we meet together as a home church, um, and basically this is an opportunity for us to kind of chat with what's going on in the week, what's been happening with the praxis, what's going on within our home churches. Just basically an opportunity for us to kind of share honestly and talk about the things that we've been learning. So I have with me this week. I have Chris with me. So hi, Chris. And
Hi, everybody.
we've got Ellen is in the chat. Hi, Ellen.
Hi, Ellen.
We got Elsie. Elsie says hello, family.
Hi, Elsie.
So I'm actually really excited. And actually, hold on. I think I'm gonna change this around. Just like hold on one second. I'm
Oh,
I'm
no.
gonna move this around a little bit because it's gonna bug me. But there we go.
Okay, that works.
Yeah, it's because I'm gonna end up looking. I kind of have my stuff here, and then um the stream thing that runs the stream is over here. So you're gonna see me glance over here a lot, and so at least this makes it look like I'm looking at you, Chris. Is what that's gonna
Gotcha.
do. Um,
I'll put my stuff up on my double screen over here, so also when I'm looking at this screen, it looks like I'm looking at you.
yeah, we're just looking at each other, right? Um, my mom says, like to see everyone maskless. Yeah, I don't have a mask on. But yeah, so this week on the Praxis, we got to dive into. Oh, also, actually, before I forget, we've got. Um, oh wait, hold on a second. So we do have the number available for anyone who wants to call in, and I think this might be a fun one. Because this week in the Praxis, what we went through is we went through the Book of Job. So this whole week, this week was on the Book of Job, and I actually really liked the Book of Job. I feel like I haven't touched the Book of Job in a really long time. It's been a while, and it was kind of a really good experience to go back and to revisit it. I don't know what your experience was this week, Chris. But I found myself, I actually put the praxis down and then just opened and read through all of Job. Um, and so that's what kind of I ended up doing.
We will get to talk about how I feel about the Book of Job because I talked about it this morning in small group, and I have some issues with the Book of Job. It is a struggle for me because because of things we can talk about like here.
Right, right. Yeah. We could probably dive right into those things. But yeah, so it was 42 chapters is Job. Um, and I found myself very much engaged, almost to the point where I couldn't put it down because of what was happening on the pages. I thought was just such a fascinating thing. But yeah, let's just like dive right in. So, what are the things that that you felt were kind of challenging for you as you went through the Job this week?
For me, there's always kind of a struggle with the framework of Job and kind of why is God even not just why does God allow these things to happen to Job, but also why is God even in a contest with Satan? Because Satan can come in and say things, but Satan is irrelevant to God. Satan has no power before God.
Right. Right, yeah. So there's that opening scene right in Job, where you basically have, and let me see if I can bring this up. Um, Also, I just want to encourage everyone that's watching, everyone that's viewing, if you have your own questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll hopefully kind of to kind of chat about everything. But let me switch over to this. So I do have it open. So yeah, so you have like this opening scene in Job, um, where it sort of sets the landscape of what's going on here. Hey, in the land of Uz, is a man named Job. One of the things I think is also kind of worth mentioning is that like this is a really old text, and so like this is actually what's happening here is not in Israel. Like this is in a completely different land. Um, like the people that are the characters that you see chat, interacting with one another aren't Israelites. So this is potentially like before Abraham. Um, but you have basically sets up this person Job. He's seen as a very righteous man, so righteous that like he even does sacrifices just in case for his children. And then you have this here. So now there was a yeah. So it says now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and the Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to the Satan, "From where do you come?" And the Satan answered the Lord and said, "From roaming about the earth, walking around on it." The Lord said to the Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil." So I don't know if you noticed when I was reading that I did replace the word Satan with the term the Satan, because I feel like one of your first issues, or one of the hard things to kind of wrestle with when it comes to this book, is that like it seems like, why is there this like wagering happening between God and Satan? And that's actually, I don't think that's what's happening here, because in Hebrew, um, the word that is here is, it's hasatan. It's the Satan. It's a title. It's a noun. So this isn't sort of the same Satan that gets referred to, or at least I think that this isn't the same Satan that gets referred to in the New Testament. I believe that this is mostly just, you have this sort of divine council. So you have God, and then it says like, so it says God and then the sons of God. So you have like the Elohim of Elohims, who's God, and then you have the son of Elohim. And so this is sort of the the godly court that it's sort of, God is king, and this is his court that helps him run the universe, right? And so there's someone among the court that is sort of going is uh, so the term the Satan is the opposer. So they are in opposition to what God is saying. So God is saying, "Hey, check out my servant Job. He is, a righteous man." And so then the opposer is basically saying, "I think that he's only righteous because you do good things for him." So it's like, does Job fear God for nothing? You have not made a fence around, you have not made a fence around him and his house and all he has on every side. You have blessed the works of his hands and his possessions, and have increased in the land. So it's like, it's almost like an entry. Like, if you think about the book of Job as almost a thought experiment of, is Job just doing these things because God is blessing him? Like, does Job love God for who God is, or does Job just like to get good things from God? And so it kind of opens up as this like thought experiment. And so then God was like kind of basically saying like, okay, well then let's see. Let's find out. And so the book itself is kind of an exploration into this idea of like, is it good for God to bless the righteous, or does, by blessing the righteous, does that corrupt their intentions for pursuing God to begin with? So like that's one of the things that's happening. And then there's another theme too, is also challenging this idea that those who do good should get blessings, and those who should do evil should be cursed, right? It's sort of challenging that thought. So I'm not sure what you're thinking, what your thoughts are on those ideas, but like that's one of the things I think is happening right in the opening. Is I think this isn't like the way we normally think about, the devil, and that God is just giving Job over to the devil as his like plaything. I think it's mostly just, it's sort of God is saying like, this is my servant Job, and someone's saying, well, does he really love you for you, or is it just because you do good things for him? And so then God sort of gives permission for this to be tested.
And there is, yeah, I will agree that I will definitely admit that there's some of this that is kind of not just about not just the idea of if you do good things, if you will have, uh, you will be blessed, and if you do bad things, you will be cursed. But also, kind of, if you don't do bad things, you won't be punished. But also, on some level, I can kind of reconcile this with the idea that this is a world of pain and suffering and death, and that is the fallen world we live in. And so, living in it is going to accept that there is an element of pain and death and suffering that has nothing to do with whether you've earned it. Although there's enough of kind of a Calvinist substrate in me that I always have to resist the idea to think about. Of course, you deserve it. You are an evil person. You deserve all the bad things to happen in you in life. So, which is also not a good and helpful stance to take. But
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's almost that's kind of a point that gets made later on too. I think toward the end is kind of like this idea is like we kind of we all have like we deserve far worse than what we get. If that makes any sense. This idea that like if we truly wanted a because like there we have this idea that like the way the world should run is that the people who do good things should should be blessed for doing good, and the people who should do bad things, they should be punished for doing bad, right? Like this is the sort of the view that Job has, that his friends have, and also what makes the dialogue between Job and his friends so interesting, because here his friends are saying like, surely you must have done something wrong, Job. Like
yeah,
there's some sin in your life that you're not addressing, and that's why these bad things are happening to you. And Job's saying like, I've searched myself, like I can't think of a single thing, like I'm righteous, like like I'm telling you there isn't a sin. And so that's just like conflict between the two of them, because both of them have this belief that like when you do good things, you're blessed by God. When you do bad things, you're punished by God. And sort of the point of the book is that's actually not the way it works. And if it did work that way, then all of humanity would just be wiped off the face of the earth, right? Because all of humanity, like we are all bad and we deserve death. And that's kind of like what I think sort of when you get to the conclusion at the end, when, God or Job finally has an opportunity to sort of talk to God, confront God, and God's response to Job, where he basically is saying like, I know way more about what is going on in the cosmos than you can even imagine and even fathom. And like the example he brings up with the Leviathan, and saying like, here's this Leviathan, this huge beast that I'm proud of. I created it. It is neither good nor bad, but it's dangerous. If you go and provoke it, it will devour you. But it's neither evil, good or evil. And I think in a way that's like God's saying that like there are things that happen in life that you can't really put into a category of like good and evil. There's this, like it's mostly just like it's a thing that's created and it's dangerous. You should stay away from it. I don't know.
and also I have to remember that, kind of like as you talked about in the intro, like this is pre-Abrahamic basically, and kind of its worldview and kind of setup. Like this is a note I had from our discussion about them last week in our small group about Abraham, about them. We are very used to the old covenant that God had with the Israelites, where God gave a set of laws to the Israelites, and the Israelites had to follow that laws, and they would, and that was the deal, for lack of a better term, they had with God. But this isn't even. This is before that. This is a different deal where with Abraham believed and it was counted as righteousness. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting too, because it also makes you think too, like what did, Job being a righteous man, what did that actually entail? Like, how did that sort of play out? So
I, I I think it's interesting to think about kind of like his relationship with God, that he was so both worshipful and maybe afraid of God that he was giving sacrifices for his children, because it's like maybe they did something and cursed God. I need to cover for their actions as well. He had that much fear and or respect, or
Yeah.
that he held God so high that he wanted to make sure that even his children were right before God.
Yeah, I think the word I would use is like reverence. I feel like there's like a reverence there, right? Like a
Yeah,
respect.
that's a good word.
So Miss Jackie says, I know that Job had a lot of faith in God, but I also believe that God had a lot of faith in Job. He knew that Job would not turn on him. Satan would not be able to turn his faith in the Lord. Yeah, and I think there's an element too, though, where it's like I I think God knew that Job was faithful in terms of you know the faith that he had, but I think there is because like there's still a like Job. There's a part of Job's understanding of who God is and what He does that I think was lacking, and I think because like this experience that Job went through. So this is another thing too. So I would argue that so again, kind of going back to like this idea that like God gave Job over to the devil to as his plaything, right? To as a wager or a bet, right? Um, so the first part is like I don't think that's what's really happening. That's not really. It's like this Satan is not that Satan. And then the other part is that there is a something that a revelation that happened for Job. So he benefited from this experience, and he benefited in the way that like I think ultimately at the end of the book, Job had a better understanding of who God is and what He does. Because prior to this, he still had this like I think in the arguments between him and his friends you can see that they still have this like view of God that was based on this like um that was based on a, like almost an element of like their own self righteousness and like it was very much about like I do the good things I like they were operating within this framework of I do good I do bad I get bad bad things come at me and like basically like that's just not how God works. God's focusing on the heart. It's way more dynamic, it's way more complex than that. And so I think by the end of this, Job is able to see that as God is sort of talking to him and talking about the cosmos and all of these things. Job is able to come to that revelation and that realization now. And so I think he does benefit from this experience. So then you also have this other theme that you can see that is through this suffering that Job goes through that brings about an understanding and a maturity and knowing God better.
Um, yeah, uh, we. I think there's also something that's helpful for me to think about as well as the idea that kind of like related to my comment about this is pre-covenant is that these people's knowledge of God must have been on some level personal in the sense that they didn't know God through the scriptures, or they didn't know him through the prophets, through other people reading the word and interpreting it. They didn't even really have a word to go to other than what God gave to them. So we don't know what God's relationship is with Job beforehand, but we know that God considers Job his servant, and we know that Job is reverent, as you say, enough to God to offer sacrifice. So there must have been some kind of connection to each other beforehand.
Yeah. Was there anything else that jumped out at you that was like, oh man, this is strange, or like, oh, this is rubbing me the wrong way?
That's the main thing that kind of bothers me. I do think like the Friends get something of a bad reputation because they're wrong, of course, but also they're doing their best to kind of like comfort him in the way they know how. I don't know if I were one of Job's friends, I would have done better per se.
Right.
If I am Bildad or Eliphaz, I don't know that I'm going to say this is God just testing you.
Right. Yeah. Actually, and that's one of the other things that jumped out at me too. Is like I kind of saw my own self in the friends. You know. because like a lot of the arguments they were making were just like, oh man, I feel like I've said that before to somebody, at some point. And realizing that um, yeah, because like I think there's a point where Job is like, you guys are really bad comforters. Like you guys are, you're not really helping me feel any better. You're just making me feel worse. Um, and I was able to kind of just think about it and like reflect of like, man, how many times have I done that, right? Of like, here is somebody going through a hard time, and I immediately go into like problem solving mode. And oftentimes that problem solving mode translates to be like, well, you've got to be doing something wrong, right? Like, what is the thing that you're doing wrong? Like, how can we fix the thing so that you can do better? Um, and I think sometimes like that's not the point, you know? Um,
And there's always the assumption that you can fix it, that you can come in and fix this other person's problems, that you are uniquely better suited to fix this person's problems than they are.
right, right. That, yeah, exactly. There's that like almost that feeling of like superiority of like, well, if I were in your shoes, like I would do this differently and that would fix all the problems. And it's like, I mean, and I think the other thing is like it also kind of reveals that tendency to want to like, when bad things happen, immediately go to that thought process of like, oh well, God must be cursing me because I did something bad, right? Like immediately associating some form of hardship with some like curse from God. And that is like not, that's just not the way it works. Like that's not the way it works at all. It reminds me of, sort of that interaction with Jesus, and he heals the blind man, or yeah, I think it was the blind man. And the disciples are like, or the question was asked, like, what sin, you know, what did he commit? And Jesus was like, he was just blind. Like there was no sin. He just, so that thought that like, oh, any ailment or anything, any you know, tragedy in your life is the result of some sin. Like that was sort of the way, that was what people thought. That's kind of how they thought the world worked. And that's also why they tended to associate those that were rich and prosperous. They viewed those people as righteous men because they must be righteous because otherwise they wouldn't have all that all that money.
Oh no, I've shrunk.
Oh,
Um,
I don't know how that happened.
I saw my camera glitch for a second, so I'm pretty sure that's on my end. There's also in like one of my other readings I'm doing on my tablet, kind of like is going through Luke and Acts, and there's just this. I think it's Luke 13 where Jesus is talking about these bunch of random people who got killed, and he talks about like because a tower fell on them while they were building, and he's like, and Jesus basically says, "Do you think they were the only people in Jerusalem who ever sinned, and that's why the tower fell on them?" It's like, no, sometimes some of these things are a part of the world. So
Right? Yeah. Sometimes just bad things happen. My mom says in Jonah, um, they had the same thought. Yeah, I think, and that's an interesting one to I think to kind of bring in here too, because I think in a way both cases you're sort of having these like shadows of the Messiah show up, right? So, and I think Adam even mentioned it in the message this morning of like how you have Job um, asking for I just wish there was an intermediary, right? Like I need a high priest, right, to go on behalf of to to what's the word I'm looking for, to hear my
intercede
case, intercede, right? Um,
or
and
advocate.
and yeah, there we go, an advocate, right? I just need an advocate to like plead my case before the court. And so here you have that with Job, and then you have Jonah, which is like, here Jonah is actually sent to go into sort of, you know, relay a message from God to the Ninevites and runs away. and does everything he can almost to avoid having to do his sort of duties. And a lot of it is because he's coming from this place where he didn't think that the Ninevites deserved to be saved. He was kind of waiting. He wanted God's judgment to rain down on them because of the bad things that they had done. So it's a good point.
I have a note from our discussion about uh, from this morning. One of the things I noted is kind of wondering, would Job have gotten an audience without his faith? Because in the end, of course, after the three friends run out of arguments, plus the other friend comes in, is kind of Job does eventually get his chance to plead his case before God, or at least ask God, why did this happen? And Job ends up being humbled and understanding that I'm not able to understand that. But it's also kind of a testament. In some ways, it's hard not to think that it's a testament to his faith that he even got to even plead his case to God.
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like he would have gotten an audience anyway. Like, and I think part of it is just because like I think even him demanding for an audience is kind of like, who are you to demand that, right? Um, and I think a lot of it was just coming from his own place of trying to make sense of things, um, which is really kind of interesting because, like, Job is making his arguments over and over and over again as to why he just wants to know, like, why this is happening, right? Like, he's like trying to sort of figure it out. And even like saying like, well, if only you can, create some way in which I can interact with you and I won't, like, burst into flames. Like, he's trying to figure out like ways to get to actually, safely do this audience. Um,
He, he never doubts God's power or righteousness in all this, or he never doubts that God he never seems to doubt the power of God or the correctness of God. He just wants to understand, why is this happening to
right. I mean, there's some points where he does get close to being like, he's sort of raising the question is like, is God just? Like,
me?
I don't know any, because like, there was a thing that I read actually that I thought was helpful. And it talked about sort of like there's these like three main kind of like things that, you know, so these three things that they were trying to reconcile, like three understandings that they were trying to reconcile. And so like the first one is like God is just and good. Like that was like one pillar that they had of like, we know God is just and good. And then there's this other one of like the retribution principle, right? Like that God has ordered the world so that good deeds are rewarded and evil deeds are punished. And then there's the third one is like Job's innocence, right? So these are like the three main things that get argued throughout the book. And so his friends are basically arguing that God is just and good, and that there is this retribution principle, right? The good deeds are rewarded, evil deeds are punished. And so for them, they're thinking then Job must not be innocent. But then Job knows he's innocent, and he has this understanding of this like retribution principle. So he's questioning whether or not God is actually just and good. And I think the kind of the end of it is that like it's like God is just and good and Job is innocent. It's this retribution principle that they think kind of is at work in the world that's not. Like that is ultimately the thing that needs to kind of go away. Like that's the thing that God is trying to address. Um,
And in some ways, it's if we remove the concept of the retribution principle you talk about, and be like, uh, uh, the world becomes a lot scarier, because it's on some ways it's comforting to think about that if we do good, good things will happen to us, and if we do bad things will happen to us. That's good and bad are kind of very fuzzy terms, but like it's at least aspirational. We think I could probably do good, kind of. But in a world where even if you do good, bad things can still happen to you is terrifying for a lot of people. But it is really the
Right.
world we live
Right.
in.
And that I think kind of gets to, and thankfully we do live in that world, because you know that is why Jesus, right? Like, we don't get what we deserve, and that's good. We're thankful for that, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, but I think because there's another kind of, I think, a theme that's playing out here too, and that's just sort of related to like this concept of suffering and righteousness, particularly suffering when um, you don't really like the so because like I feel like there's almost another shadow here of the Messiah, in the sense that here you have a man who is righteous that suffered for the glory of God, right? Versus in the future you're going to have Jesus who is righteous, who suffers for the good of all humanity. Um, and so, I think there's like that, those parallels there. And it begins to make you think of like, well, what is the role of suffering? What role does suffering have to play in all of this? And I think that like the way I would would kind of approach that is, I think that suffering is the tool. It's a necessary part of being human that we need in order to grow our own souls, grow the sort of our maturity and our understanding of sort of who God is, what He does, and just kind of, yeah. Because like I think it's through suffering that we learn how to empathize, and how we learn how to connect with one another better, right? Because we can recognize that like pain isn't a good thing to experience, and therefore want others to not have to experience that pain.
Or better be able to help others when they're in that pain
Right.
as well.
Being able to counsel them in a way that's actually comforting, and that doesn't make them feel
Yeah.
worse about themselves.
Not just maybe just
Right.
confess your
Just
sin
pray
already.
more. You just got to go to church more. You got to read your Bible more. Just do all. If you just did good things, then good things will come back to you. And I mean, I think there's also an element of, because so I think one of the questions that was asked this morning was related to sort of like, how does this book? I'm trying to see if I can pull up the actual question, but it was a question related to, I think it was on maybe page 17, or is it? No. Yeah, I think 16 in the praxis, and it's like, how do you respond when God allows some hardships to come your way? Do you believe that He's allowing this in order to bless you more down the road? Is it easy to feel good about life when everything is rosy? What do you do when life is not so easy? That was kind of the question that was posed. And I'm not sure. And actually, I mean, that kind of question, I think, is a question that everyone can answer, including chat, if you want to kind of put your own thoughts out there. Um, but I'm not sure if you guys talked about that question at all in your home group, Chris, or.
We talked about it a little bit. We had some good discussion. Uh, I think there's a lot of temptation for. No, I'm not going to say temptation. I think there's an inclination for a lot of people when they're suffering to kind of make a very binary phrasing out of it, where it's either uh, I am being I am being tested by I am blameless and being tested by Satan, or I am guilty and being punished by God. When kind of as we've talked about, there's also a thing of you can you are being refined by God and improved because it is nothing about what you have done bad, but this suffering will allow you to
Right.
grow. As uh, and we kind of want to live in a world of where there is no suffering, but that is not the world we live in because we live in a fallen world of sin and death. And so uh, at some point God is using the suffering, which is an inherent element of this world, uh, to improve us. Because if I mean, God couldn't have ever known suffering because he's God, and in heaven there is no suffering. I don't know that I'm on 100% accurate the theological grounds right there, but I also freely admit I do not know what heaven is like, generally speaking, and I will not know until I leave
Right,
this
right, yeah.
earth. Until God, until God sent His Son to die on the cross, I don't. I'm not. I don't know if God had ever experienced suffering before.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's almost an element of like, because you know, and I feel like this is gonna go down another rabbit hole, but um, along the same that vein of like not necessarily knowing like what heaven is like, right? I do think there is an element like I think we often tend to like picture heaven in this way where it's like, well, everything's just going to be perfect and it's all going to be good, right? Um, but there's a part of me that doesn't quite that actually doesn't quite compute. Where I don't think things are going to go as like always perfect in the way that we think there are. Similar to like, I feel like there's an element where God was, I mean, it says God was sort of disappointed and sad when there was the fall. Like, I think there's a line in Genesis where it says God regretted creating humanity. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
so I think that there is I mean, granted, that was like in relation to the fall, but I think there's an element where it's like, I don't think things are always just going to go the way we want them to go. But I do believe that like suffering that we experience or hardship or maybe disappointment or any of those things, those emotions, they won't be caused by other humans, right? Like I feel like the any hardship that we would feel would mostly be related to maybe something that we're like interacting with in terms of like creation, like because I also think that heaven will be able to create similarly to yeah. Anyway, those are all like side things. They're not really important. Um, but that's my kind of thought there. But the the way I kind of answered that question this morning related to suffering is more of like I find myself in a place where when things are going on, instead of looking at it from a thing of like, man, I can't wait till this is over, my prayer tends to be more of like, God, like, how can I use this hardship as a way to like how can I use this as a way to like flourish? Like how can I flourish in this suffering and in this hardship? How can I what are the things that you want me to learn through this and what are the and I think sometimes too you go through things and it's just there's not much for you to learn. It's just more of just like stuff happens and you just got to get through it. But kind of looking for those opportunities to like bring glory to God in a way that and I think it's really easy to say those things, and it's a lot harder to live through those things. But I do find myself tending more towards that direction of like coming at it from a perspective of like, you know, how how do you want me to use this experience to better learn more about myself or about you or to be able to bring you glory?
I do know that is a thing I struggle with in my when I am suffering, that I am not good about appreciating it and framing it as an opportunity to grow and as an opportunity for flourishing, to use your word, and that's a really good word. I am like, I'm going to make this very binary and be like, oh, I don't, oh, this is happening to me because of these reasons and I just want to get through it. When is the end? But yeah, there is an element of it that this is going to make us better. It's sort of the boot camp principle of them. A lot of it's the stuff you just have to get through. There's no doing good. There's no doing bad. There's
Right.
just getting
Yeah. The
through.
fastest way to complete boot camp is to graduate. So, yes, Ellen mentions, the answer to all things is trust God, and amen. I think that is definitely the answer to it. I think, um, and I think oftentimes too, because like you know the other, somewhat related, you'll also hear people think like, well, when it comes to approaching the Bible, like you just got to figure out like what are the things that you need to obey, or that like love of God outputs obedience. I think that may have been like last week's conversation with Abraham, maybe. Yeah,
Faith, trust, obey,
faith,
or
trust, obey.
allegiance.
Um, and I think it really comes down to more of just like that like so I like the word, and that's what we talked about last week, is I like the word allegiance, and the reason why I like it is because to me, it's sort of similar to obey, but for me that word allegiance is like I'm choosing God. And I think that really when it comes down to like, being able to put your trust in God, that's where it's coming from. It's that very core part of it, that heart that says, I like this may not make sense to me right now. I can't logically figure out why God would be doing these things to me. But I'm going to choose to trust God because I know these things about God. There's these things that I know about God. And to kind of bring it back to Job, and because like I feel like there was an element where his friends weren't necessarily understanding sort of some of the points he was trying to make, because Job is saying like I'm not he's kind of saying like I'm not cursing God, I'm not trying to like come at him, like I'm not trying to say these bad things about him. It's just him. It's basically like Job is coming from a place of wanting to understand. And I think in a way like that's okay to come from that place of understanding. But that also sometimes too, like, because like the thing I think is interesting is God never answers Job's question. The way the book ends, God does not answer any of his questions. But the response that God gave was enough for Job to realize like he got what he needed out of that interaction. And I feel like I've had my own personal experiences, like as I'm trying to dig deep into the scriptures to find like a particular answer. I also have, there's because like, so there was a time where I wanted to figure out exactly like at what point does somebody become saved, right? Like where is the line? Like, because like recognizing like, well, it's not necessarily just a prayer, because like the words that you say, oftentimes it's like with the meaning behind those words. And I know for me too, because like when I first, said the sort of sinner's prayer and accepted Jesus into my heart, like I had no idea what any of that meant, you know? And so it was like, was it when I said those words that I was saved? Or was it when I began the journey? And so I was trying to figure out exactly like where the line was that I could draw. And I couldn't find one. But then I realized that like I don't need to know where that line is, because I trust that God, like wherever that line may be, I trust that God is just and holy. Like he is full of mercy and grace and love and patience and wisdom, and like he's all of these things. So wherever that line is, it's going to be representative of that character of God. And so I don't have to worry about that, because God is God and I am not. And so I can just trust in the character of God and know that wherever that line is, it's going to be of God's character. And so I feel like in a way, like that's kind of what happened with Job at the end, is like God was able to sort of really zoom out, paint this like very large picture, like sort of the big picture of what's happening here. And it's in as Job is sort of interacting with this big picture that God is presenting to him, that he realizes like God is God, I'm not. So whatever the answer is, I don't need to know it. Because like part of God's argument, like I feel like that's the first argument that God made, is sort of this like, even if I told you why this is happening to you, you wouldn't understand. I think that was God's first argument. So I also just noticed that is 4:47. I feel like time has flown by.
And this thought came up in our comment, and I think I'm taking this from Norm. So I'm going to give credit. Norm, this is your idea. I'm just using it if you're watching, Norm. But Norm, the idea is that Job wanted an advocate before God, and he didn't have one really until he met God, and God met with him. And that's kind of like you talked about how God was. You're not even really capable of understanding why I did it. And that's kind of where you have to have the advocate to kind of move in, someone who can understand. And the to kind of to wrap things up and bring it into our covenant, we now have that advocate who can understand it. We have Jesus, who is of course both fully God and fully man, and so understands both those worlds. And I think that's kind of interesting to think about as Jesus as that
Yeah,
bridge.
yeah, amen. And I think that's a great way to kind of also frame things too, is that like there are mysteries that we were never meant to know. And so we can trust that because like we have that advocate for us now, right? Like we have that bridge between the two. Um and we can, so there's some things that we can just sort of trust and not necessarily need a clear explanation for. Um so But but yeah. Was there anything else that you wanted to chat about as we wrap this up, or
Nope,
all
think
right?
I'm
Well,
good.
I want to thank you for hanging out today and chatting with me and talking about. I mean, well, I guess did you have any initial like when did you realize that we were going to talk about Job during the Sunday chat? Did that ever hit you at all?
Like Monday when we started reading the because like we agreed like last week that we talked about like, hey, we should do the Sunday chat for this week, and I volunteered to do it, and then we started reading. It's like, oh, we're coming up to Job. Oh,
Right.
that
Yeah.
one. Uh, there is one last note I'd like to throw in to get to put a heavy metal reference in here. There is the line on verse are on page, I forget, it's on page 26, where God says, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge?" There's a band called Day of Vengeance, and they have a song called "Horseback Riding in Arabia," and like the final little section of that song is them quoting that verse. "Who is this that darkens my counsel, bringing words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man, for I will answer. For I will question you, and you shall answer me." And it's kind of one of those where metal really is a good template to frame some of the Bible into, because it's kind of this powerful like God descending on thing to the voice of God coming in and descending and now entering into the court, and kind of that power that comes with
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
statement.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. I love the
And I will of course put a
right.
link to
Exactly.
it so that no one else can
Thank you.
listen to it.
Thank you for that. That's awesome. I love the metal references. So but yeah, so thank you for chatting. Thank you everybody that viewed, everybody that watched, everybody that also put their comments in the chat. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for interacting with us. And I'm gonna close this out in prayer, and then we'll see you next week. Um, so
All
God,
right.
I just thank you. Um, I thank you for all that you are. I thank you for all that you're doing in and amongst us. I thank you for this opportunity for us to be able to come together um, as a body, as a church body, as a sort of the network of home churches that the things that you were doing here at Graceway. God, I want to just thank you for all of those things, for this opportunity for us to chat and to share open and honestly with what you're showing us. And I also want to thank you for the book of Job. I think there's so much in that book, God, that reveals more about who you are and your character and sort of what is happening within the cosmic realm that we may not fully understand or comprehend or even realize, Father. And I want to thank you. And I just ask, God, that you just continue to draw us nearer to you, Father. Continue to reveal us more of who you are. Be with us as we continue to dive into the Bible, the praxis as a community, um, and give us that sort of inspire us, Father, to reach out to one another, to be able to connect and to be able to fellowship. And I ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and we will see you. We'll see you next week. And actually, hold on. I keep on forgetting there's a new way for me to stop the stream. So, all right. Bye.